and volunteer manager here at the Hayward Area Historical Society. I want to thank all of you for coming today. We're extremely excited about this exhibit and this program. We do a Dia de los Muertos exhibit every year, and this year it has turned out phenomenally. But we do appreciate your support by coming. Also, we've been able to make this program and most of our programs free of admission, but we still need your support as community members. We have membership. If you're interested in learning about that, we can answer questions after the program, things like that. But we really, really appreciate your support so we can continue doing programs like this. But without further ado, let me introduce our speaker. She's an expert on Dia de los Muertos, and we're really lucky to have her here, right in our backyard. But without further ado, Bea Hocker.
Buenas tardes. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I say that with sincerity because I really enjoy sharing insights into Mexican culture. That's been my career for many, many, many years. And here we are sitting among art that's been inspired by the traditional Mexican festival of Días de los Muertos, or Days of the Dead. And I imagine some of you might have come because with the hope that you will learn something new about Dia de los Muertos. And in turn, it's my hope that I will be able to do this for you. My experience with death has been through the demise of my two grandmothers and my parents. And I observed that each one of them, in their later years, had a very different view of death from one another. And I'll explain that. For example, my fraternal grandmother thought of death as an angel that was going to come and deliver her from her ailing body, because she died when she was 95, and in turn was going to take her to her true home, which was to live close by her beloved Santos, while my fraternal grandmother saw death as this stalker, a stalker that at the moment she showed physical weakness was just going to pounce on her. In fact, in the last month before her death, she asked that the big overstuffed chair be put in her bedroom, and she would sleep there at night, thinking that somehow that was going to fool death. And then there was my mother. She thought of death as a thief that was going to take her away from her beloved family. Whereas my father saw death as this unavoidable visitor, and that was going to show up sooner or later, so why even think about it? What is interesting is that cultural groups from different parts of the world have also felt the need to attire death in many guises. Okay, death has been portrayed as both male and female, as angel, divinity, in animal form, and as a specter of evil. Through time and space, humankind has created rites that connect us with the spirit world in our search for knowledge of the beyond, and perhaps that is to quiet the uncertainty of our eventual absence from death. I have often been asked in my career, why do Mexican people seem to have such an obsession about death? Why do they surround themselves with countless images of death and extend their belief to include an annual visit by their ancestor spirits? To begin to answer these questions, I feel the need to explain the worldview or the view of death that existed in pre-conquest Mexico. The early cultures of Mexico lived in a world where the supernatural coexisted with the natural world. Their environments were the dwelling places of spirit. They dwelled in the sky, the earth, and the underworld. All living things were believed to contain a spirit, human and non-human alike. The borders between the terrestrial and supernatural worlds were almost non-existent. Spirits, divine and human, were believed to exert influence on the well-being and fortunes of the living. So the living maintained communion with their gods and ancestor spirits through ritual practices. And you're looking at some of these sculptures of those kind of spirits. The early peoples of Mesoamerica or Middle America saw life as transitory, with death opening the passageway to another level of existence. Death was never seen in opposition with life, but both serving as complements to one another. A close observation of nature had taught them that death was an essential component in the process of regeneration. Death was both God and human, moving throughout their universe, assisting the regeneration of life through its own end. Because death was seen in partnership with life, death was celebrated with ceremony in its indivisible connection to life and was commemorated in the artistic works of Mexico's pre-Hispanic artists. This mask dates to 1000 BC and expresses the equality of life and death. This fragment of a funerary urn dating to 600 and 900 AD depicts life to death, each a consequence of the other. This beautiful sculpture is the god Quetzalcoatl, who is a powerful figure in Mexican and Central American mythology and a dominant motif in the art of Mesoamerica. He is a god of life, as he is credited in myth to giving life to the humanity of this era by sprinkling his blood over the human bones of previous creations and discovering corn to feed them. Let's look at the back of the sculpture. On his back, Quetzalcoatl supports death. But if you look within this collective frame of death, he sustains the lifeblood of man, the beating heart. This Aztec codice, or painted manuscript, portrays Quetzalcoatl wearing a bird mask to denote another aspect of his divinity as god of wind. But he in turn supports Mictlantecutli, lord of the region of the dead, on his back. Now the magical result of this union is the human heart, which emerges from the skeleton side. This makes reference to the belief that matter is reborn from its own end. One can say that the concept of the indivisibility of life and death is the underlying framework for the rites of Días de los Muertos. The living support their dead with their rites of remembrance, with the hope that when their own lives flow into death, they too will symbolically be brought back to the world of the living, even if only for an instance, through the ceremonial offerings of companionship and the gifts of life that nourish both our humanity and spirituality. The contemporary celebration has its origins in the pre-Hispanic festivals of the dead. The chronicles of two 16th century missionary friars, Diego Duran and Bernardino Sagahun, living in colonial Mexico, record the events. Duran wrote, "At the beginning of the 8th month of our calendar, these people celebrated with great rejoicing the feast called Micalhuitontli, the Feast of the Little Dead. In the solemn ceremonies of this day, offerings and sacrifices were made to honor and venerate these children. This feast was an anticipation of the great Feast of the Dead, when our adults were to be remembered. This drawing from Codice Borbonico depicts a ritual of the Feast of the Little Dead. You'll see there are marigolds in these garlands. These marigolds, since pre-Hispanic times, were considered the sacred flower of the dead. Today, in some regions of Mexico, this feast of the remembrance of children still exists. Parents sit on the sidelines while their children place offerings on the graves of infants and children. This practice assures the continuity of Días de los Muertos traditions by future generations. The Pre-Hispanic festival, commemorating the adult dead in pre-Hispanic time, is recorded to have been from August 25th until September 14th of our calendar. Offerings of food and drink were placed on the tombs. However, the main activity was the veneration of a sacred tree trunk, on which was placed an image of a god. At the base of the tree were placed offerings of food, drink, incense, accompanied with singing and dancing. Of course, these are the very same kind of offerings that exist today. Excavations by archaeologists on grave sites show evidence that since early times, the Mexican people have honored their dead with rituals, burying them with offerings of pottery, food, and household objects. Every act performed in the rituals for the dead confirm a belief that death opened passage to another level of existence. This codice drawing shows that cremation ceremonies also required offerings to sustain the spirit in its journey. For the ancient Mesoamerican cultures, it was the nature of one's death that determined one's destination in the afterlife, and not the quality of one's life. This mural, which was found in one of the structures of Teotihuacan, portrays Tlalocan, the paradise of the rain god Tlaloc. This paradise housed the spirits of those who drowned, were killed by aquatic creatures, or lost their life to incidents involving storms. Another portion of the mural portrays the spirits singing, reciting poetry, and participating in joyful activities. Warriors killed in battle, sacrificial victims went to the eastern paradise, the house of the sun, and escorted the sun in its first part of the journey. Women who died in childbirth, the Cihuateteo woman goddesses, accompanied the sun in its descent to the underworld. All other human spirits were destined to journey the 8 regions of the underworld to reach Mictlan, region of the dead. Each level inflicted challenging hardships on the soul. Codex Vaticanos depicts the journey, starting from the top. You had to cross a river with the aid of a dog. You passed through crashing mountains. You scaled a mountain where the stones were sharp like obsidian blades. Passed through the region of the icy winds that cut like blades. Passed to the region where the souls floated like flags. Went to the region where the souls were shot with arrows. The region where dogs devoured the hearts. Finally, through the blinding fog, and then you finally reached the Mictlan that was governed by the god of death. It was a place devoid of fire and light, where the souls experienced no suffering. And I've always thought when I talk about these regions that I imagine how many people must have drowned themselves rather than go through all those regions. These were the beliefs and customs of the natives when the Spaniards invaded Mexico and conquered the Mexicas, which we now call Aztecs. This happened in 1521. The struggle was not between 2 armies, but between 2 civilizations, each of which had its own culture and traditions. The aim of the Spaniards was not merely to replace the Aztecs as the ruling power in Mexico, but also to impose a new way of life on a subject population, defeat, transform the Valley of Mexico and its surrounding waters into Nueva España, New Spain. And for the native peoples, it meant the end of everything their civilization stood for. The immense campaign of acculturation, whether by force, education, or conversion, became the preoccupation of the conquerors. The evangelizing Spanish church was cruel in its attempt to eradicate the ancient culture by destroying sacred artifacts and sites, and forcing a foreign religion on a deeply spiritual people. And you're looking, of course, at a drawing of the gods, the sculptures and so on, of the gods being destroyed. The European missionaries set forth a strategy to combine native beliefs and practices with those of Spanish Christian nature whenever possible, to facilitate conversion of the native people. Catholic churches were often built on indigenous sacred sites. However, in the town of Cholula, the church was built on top of the pyramid. To encourage Christian worship by the native peoples, open-air chapels were built, as it was the native custom to conduct the religious ceremonies in the open-air plazas of the religious centers. It was the hope of the clergy to succeed in their attempt to achieve mass conversions of the population, and these chapels would serve well to accommodate large crowds. In Nueva España, the European missionaries had much freedom and independence in their work, and the various methods of conversions were tried. Missionaries directed their efforts to the education of the young natives to be sent out to convert and westernize their own world. An example of the merging of native and Christian ceremony is made evident in today's Mexican observances of the Dia de los Muertos. At the time, there were two Catholic feasts of the dead. One was that on November 1st, the Feast of All Saints' Day, honoring known and unknown saints, and on November 2nd was the Feast of All Souls, a day to pray for the deliverance of souls suffering in purgatory, which is the subject of this painting. Realizing that conversion of the indigenous people would not eradicate the ancient rituals of the dead, the clergy allowed aspects of these ancient rituals to be celebrated in connection with these two feasts. The merging of the indigenous and Christian feasts of the dead in time evolved into today's Días de los Muertos, homage to the dead. This is how Días de los Muertos came to be celebrated on November 1st and 2nd. During Mexico's colonial period, indigenous and European traditions mixed together in a remarkable series of new cultural combinations. Two different kinds of life absorbed each other and produced things new and different from anything else in the world. The ancient cult of death and the Christian feasts of homage to the dead produced a most unique celebration that facilitates a communion between the living and the dead. The main focus of rituals of Días de los Muertos are the ofrendas, the home offering altars for the dead, or those placed on grave sites. These are laden with gifts, with the hope that they will attract the dead to visit their living family. The placement of religious images, incense, and lit candles represent the sacred, the supernatural realm, and the supplication of the devout. Photos of the deceased and offerings of food and drink acknowledge life after death, and organic elements refer to the earth and its forces of regeneration. Symbolically, ofrendas serve as a point of connection and mediation between the realms of life, death, and rebirth. The practice of altars for the dead was conceived in pre-Hispanic Mexico. This is how we know that they existed. The Friar Bernardino de Sagahun wrote this description of them. They placed the images of the dead on those grass wreaths. Then at dawn, they put these images in their shrines on top of beds of reed, maize, sedge, or rush. Once the images were placed there, they offered them food, tamales, and gruel, or a stew made of turkey or dog's meat. Then they offered the images incense from an incense burner, which was a big cup of coals. In this ceremony, they called galonhuac. Now, in today's Días de los Muertos, preparation for the feast begins in the marketplace, where all is needed for the festival can be found. The home ofrenda is the center of family ritual for the dead. It may be elaborate or humble, according to the tastes, traditions, and purse of the family. The dominant decoration is the cempasúchil, or marigolds. It is believed that its strong scent and color attract the spirits to the mortal world and their ofrendas. Cempasúchil, as you can see, continues to be regarded as a sacred flower of the dead. The lighting of candles is associated with Christian ritual. In this Christian context, they represent the solemnity of the occasion and enlightenment. In Mexico's rites of the dead, the candles serve as a guiding light for the spirits to their ofrendas. In some regions, a candle is set for each soul that's being honored. The flower arches above the ofrendas represent both the entryway into the material world and the exit back to the spiritual realm. Water and the favorite drinks of the deceased will quench the thirst of the spirits. The burning of copal, the resin of the tree that has the same name, during rites for the dead is an ancient indigenous practice. The burning of the incense creates sacred space and carries prayers to the heavens. Its scent attracts the souls to their altars and gravesites. Here, a woman prepares an ofrenda in her kitchen. She places images of Christian saints to create sacred space and to provide protection for her living family and the souls during their visit and during the return to their spirit realm. A banquet for the spirits is placed on the ofrendas. The foods are usually those favored by the deceased while alive. Special breads, referred to as pan de muertos, or bread of the dead, are placed on the altar. The breads are shaped in various forms according to regional tradition. Human forms represent the deceased. Angel breads make reference to the souls of children. Those with a central knob and the knobs radiating around them represents either the bones, human bones, or tears. Friar Sagahun recorded that Mexico's indigenous made images of wood covered with amaranth dough in memory of their dead and ceremonially placed them on altars along with other food offerings. But in Spain, in the Segovia region, bread of the souls is the name given to the wheat loaves that are donated to beggars on All Saints' Day. These may be possible connections to this tradition of pan de muertos. Sugar skulls are also a part of Días de los Muertos traditions. The calaveras are created with molds in a variety of sizes and decorated with flowers and scrolls of colored icing and metallic colored foils. Names are written on the forehead and are for the ofrendas, but also for the living. Friends and sweethearts exchange skulls with their names. The living consume the skulls and associate pleasant sensations with their symbolic deaths. However, they understand that in the end, death will feed on the living. The art of creating sugar sculptures was introduced into Mexico by Italian missionaries. In the 1800s, I don't know if it still exists, this custom still exists, but it was recorded there was a custom in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico to unearth the skulls of the dead, brought to a local church where a grand mass was said for their souls. Labels were placed on them to remind the living to pray for them since their souls may be in purgatory. And this was conducted on November 2nd, Dia de los Muertos, the day of the All Souls Day. When the home ofrendas are complete, in some regions, families make certain that the souls will find their offerings by creating a path of marigolds petals to lead them to the altars. Now we're moving on to the cemetery. The placement of offerings on the ofrendas not only pertain to the home, but also extends to the grave sites of family members. On November 1st and 2nd, families gather in the cemeteries to clean the grave sites of their loved ones and to decorate the tombs with flowers and candles. Cempasúchil profusely decorates the graves. Family members come from far and near to join in this feast of remembrance. Some cemeteries take on the look of a fair with food vendors setting up their stands, while musicians wait to be hired to play at the gravesites. Nevertheless, It is still a celebration to honor the dead, and this is accomplished with music, song, and ceremony. Both city folk and villagers spend the day in the company of their dead, but also enjoying the sociability of the living. With great affection and good humor, the Feast of the Dead becomes a great social occasion for families in their communities. Through this coming together, family ties are renewed and strengthened and serve to reinforce the permanence of family and to perpetuate the bonds of family, even beyond death. The dead are brought to life again through the sharing of stories and memories about deceased family and friends. Through this sharing, relationships are notably enhanced. There's a strong sense of respect for the people's ancestors, and the young learn family history through the stories that are shared by adult family members. And in turn, the elderly are comforted by the thought that they will also be remembered after they have gone. In the evening, the candles are lit, and families prepare themselves for an all-night vigil at the gravesites of their family members. Offerings that have been previously arranged at people's homes are transported to the cemeteries. With all preparations completed, families await the arrival of their departed loved ones. I was fortunate enough to attend a gravesite vigil in Mexico, and this was my impression of what happened. The golden light of hundreds of candles, the haze of candle smoke and incense, the perfumed air of marigolds, and the scent of copal create an ethereal and mystical scene. Music, prayers, and whispers add another mysterious dimension to the experience, while tombstones with decorations of crosses, Christ, virgins, and angels totally transport one from the material world to the supernatural, and it becomes very difficult for anyone to doubt that spirit presences are moving about. Sunrise brings closure to the feast, and the living and the dead depart to their appropriate worlds. With death, the separation of soul and body is permanent, but even in death, souls maintain their relationship with their families and communities. Once settled in the afterworld, there is the belief the souls become an important supernatural with the power to intervene on behalf of their living families. Although this feast revolves around death, it is neither grim nor macabre. Rather, it is a warm and friendly family reunion of the living and the dead. Together in heart and spirit, the living and the dead share the pleasures of life: food, song, light, flowers, and companionship. Well, here we are today in Hayward, commemorating Dia de los Muertos with an exhibition. And commemorations of this feast for the dead are happening throughout the United States with the planning and support of Latino peoples, but with the participation of diverse communities. How and why did this feast come to be so widespread in the U.S.? Previously, Mexican and Central American immigrants in the U.S. privately observed the traditions of Dia de los Muertos. The communal celebration of this feast became part of U.S. barrio existence as a product of the Chicano civil rights movement of the 1960s and 70s, which spurred Chicanos, or Mexican Americans, to acknowledge their Mexican ancestors and reclaim their Mexican cultural heritage. Días de los Muertos became a focus for Chicanos for remembering the personal and communal past. Traditions were transformed to accommodate urban environments. Artists and communities worked together, arranging altars and ceremonies, street processions, indigenous activities, candlelight ceremonies, exhibitions, and theatrical presentations. And in concluding this, I'd like to read something that Roberto Vargas, a ceremonial leader of the Latino community, has written. Días de los Muertos affirms many of our positive values and practices, such as honoring our elders, sharing food, creating art, celebrating life, enjoying music and dance, and facing death, recognizing its power for enriching our lives. Latinos are also sharing these traditions with other people as a means of developing greater multicultural unity and helping them to learn more about our ways of respecting family, life, and death. And as a sort of special landing to everything, we're going to just show you slides, and you'll be very happy to hear that I won't say one word. And so you can just enjoy these images. And unfortunately, I forgot the CD that I usually use while you're looking at the images. But fortunately, one of the staff members came up with a CD to replace it. It might not have the same mood, but anyway, at least there's some music that you can hear when you're watching the rest of this.
the children's gallery. We have some tables set up, and we are going to be making jumping jacks if you want to join us for this workshop. Following the workshop, again, we'll have this space back to normal, and you'll be able to enjoy the exhibit. Thank you so much.
Even if you're not, even if you are choosing not to participate in the workshop, you might want to peek there because there are several already made up, so you can get an idea about these traditional toys that are sold all over the markets in Mexico for the children to even take to the cemetery, but also to be placed on the altar. So if you care to walk in there, maybe that'll convince you you'll want to make one.